Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Arisa Emma. Emma is my family name. So I am associate professor at the University of Tokyo, and it's a really great honor for me to moderate this great panel session. So first of all, I would like to introduce the panelists. I go from my side to the other end. So the person next to me here is Mr. Nick Clegg, President of Global Affairs, Meta. Then the second person is Mr. Luciano Mazza de Andrade, Director of the Department of Science and Technology and Intellectual Property at the Brazilian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Brazil. The third person is Ms. Denise Wang, Assistant Chief Executive, Data Innovation and Protection Group, Infocomm Media Development Authority, IMDA, Singapore. The next panelist is Mr. Nazar Patiria, Vice Minister of Communication of Informatics, Indonesia. The next panelist is Mr. Kent Walker, President of Global Affairs, Google and Alphabet. On the right-hand side, we have His Excellency Mr. Suzuki Junji, Minister of Internal Affairs and Communications. Okay. The panelist next to Minister Suzuki is Mr. Vinton Cerf, IGF Leadership Panel Chair and so-called father of the internet. And next to Mr. Cerf, we have Professor Jun Murai from Keio University, as known as father of Japan's internet. And last but not least, the panelist on the other end is Ms. Doreen Botgan-Martin, Secretary General of the International Telecommunication Union. So we have excellent lineup of panelists, but before we jump in the panel discussion, I would like to invite Minister Suzuki to share with us the brief overview of the current state of Hiroshima AI process led by the Japanese government now. So Minister Suzuki, the floor is yours.
はい、皆様おはよ
Good morning, everyone. I am Suzuki Junji, Minister of International Affairs and Communication. I would like to extend my gratitude to all those who are attending the Internet Governance Forum Kyoto 2023. I would also like to thank Ms. Maria Ressa and Mr. Ulrich Knudsen, OECD General Secretary General, for their very insightful keynote speeches. Now, I would like to introduce the status of the discussion on the Hiroshima AI process to set a stage for a panel discussion with multi-stakeholders to be held in this session. The rapid development and penetration of generative AI is now a matter of responsibility for us, the international community, to maximize its benefit to humanity while mitigating its risks to the economy and society. G7 Gunma Takasaki Digital and Tech Ministers meeting held April this year agreed to promptly discuss the opportunities and risks posed by generative AI and to utilize the OECD and GPay, an international public-private partnership on AI, to establish a forum for international discussion on generative AI, including 5 issues such as AI governance and promotion of transparency. And in the G7 Hiroshima Leaders Communique, it was decided to continue the discussion at the Hiroshima AI process. Subsequently, in September this year, the Hiroshima AI process G7 Digital and Tech Minister statement was formulated, which agreed on the following points. First point, necessity to prioritize issues such as ensuring transparency. 2. Establishment of international guiding principles for all AI actors and code of conduct for organizations developing advanced AI system. 3. Project-based cooperation, including promotion of research that contribute to countermeasures against disinformation. 4. Importance of exchanging views with stakeholders other than G7 governments. In today's session, we would like to receive opinions from panelists on the contents of the international guiding principles and the code of conduct for organizations developing advanced AI systems which are currently under consideration. The international guiding principle for organizations developing advanced AI systems is to put together the principles that all AI developers are expected to follow to realize safe, secure, and trustworthy AI. It also provides a set of concrete actions as a code of conduct. The first point of which is to mitigate the risks of advanced AI systems to society. This includes measures to identify, evaluate, and mitigate risks before bringing AI models to market, as well as measures to address system vulnerabilities even after market placement. So, what types of risks and vulnerabilities should AI developers bear in mind when implementing measures? The second point is to disclose information on the risks and appropriate use of advanced AI systems and to share such information among stakeholders. To ensure the users can use AI systems with confidence, businesses should clarify the result of safety assessment and capabilities and limitation of their AI models. This also includes developing and disclosing their own policies on privacy and AI governance, or they could establish a mechanism to develop and share best practices among various stakeholders. The third point is to promote research and investment to technologically mitigate the risks posed by AI. For example, development and introduction of mechanisms that enable users to identify AI-generated content, such as digital watermarking and provenance systems. In addition to these, I believe it would be necessary to prioritize the development of advanced AI systems to tackle global issues such as climate change and global health, and ensure appropriate handling of data which is fed into advanced AI system. We believe that today's AI special session is a valuable opportunity to directly hear the opinions of people from diverse backgrounds, and I am sincerely looking forward to the discussions that's about to take place. I would appreciate your frank opinions. I hope that today's session will be meaningful, not only for the panelists, but also for all of you who are listening to the discussions in the audience and online. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much for this really informative presentation, Minister Suzuki. So then, I would like to invite our panelists to share their views on some of the important aspects in the Hiroshima AI process from their perspectives. So, and I would like to ask my first question. So what types of AI systems, in particular advanced AI models such as foundation models, are you developing or placing on the market? How are they used? What solutions and benefits do they seek to offer? What do you see as the major risks and challenges are associated with the advanced AI systems you are developing, and how you're addressing those risks and challenges? So I hope this question and answer to this will give us an overview of the current situation of generative AI and foundation model across countries. So I would like to ask this question to two speakers from global AI developers, Google and Meta. So first, President Kent Walker, what is your view on this? You have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Professor Emma, and thank you for the chance to be here today. The power of AI is vast, and that is exactly why we think it needs to be developed both boldly and responsibly. AI goes well beyond a chatbot. It has the potential to change the way we do science, the way we develop technology. I thought it was very nice that the rounds of applause for today's panel went to our two technologists joining us here today, because that will be the foundation of the next great technological advance we have. Of course, you've been using AI for a dozen years if you've used Google Search or Translate or Maps, but it's going to go well beyond that now. We are seeing dramatic advances that are going to change quantum mechanics, quantum science, material science, precision agriculture, personalized medicine, bring water, clean water to people around the world. The potential is extraordinarily exciting. Just one example, our DeepMind team has helped fold proteins, understand how proteins express themselves for the 200 million proteins known to science. That would have taken hundreds of millions of years for biologists to do. It's as though you took every man, woman, and child in Japan and trained them to be a biologist and then had them do nothing but fold proteins for 3 years. And as a result, these tools are now being used by more than 1 million researchers around the world to help advance the study of medicine. And there are many more advances like that coming. But at the same time, we recognize that all of the opportunity agenda must also be balanced by a responsibility agenda and a security agenda. And it's not for one company or even one group of companies to do alone. We have worked together across the industry on groups like the Frontier Model Forum, the Partnership on AI, ML Commons, and more to develop frameworks, norms for the right kinds of research we need to do, the right standards that need to be applied. And beyond that, we need the role of government and all of you, civil society, for the frameworks that are going to matter to everybody on the planet. This is why we salute and appreciate the leadership of Japan and the Hiroshima process to drive forward with an innovation agenda that recognizes the opportunity, but also the need for thoughtful balance and the hard trade-offs that we'll need democracies to exchange ideas about. How do you balance security versus openness? How do you balance the various notions of efficiency and equity in these different tools? These are fundamental and important questions, and we welcome the participation of groups like the IGF who have brought wisdom to those debates over the internet as we apply them to this latest and great round of new technology. Thank you.
Very much, President Walker. Then I would like to invite President Nick Clegg. What is your view? You also have 5 minutes.
So, as Ken said, I mean, AI, of course, is not new. It's been talked about since the 1950s, and companies like Google, like Meta, like others, sort of research-heavy organizations have been conducting research using AI and integrating it into their products for many, many years. But clearly, this latest development of these large language models is a qualitative and quantitative, because they're very expensive, you need a lot of compute power and a lot of data, leap forward. So we're all asking ourselves in forums like this and many other forums, is it good, is it bad, how is it going to reshape the world? There's been quite a lot of breathless, somewhat hyperbolic predictions about what might happen in the future, and I would really venture 3 points at this stage. Firstly, where possible, and I think the Deputy Secretary General asked this, is this technology going to be for the many or for the few? Where possible, it is desirable, in my view, that this technology should be shared, that there should be open innovation, there should be open sourcing as much as possible of these foundation models. Companies like Meta, like Google, I don't want to speak for Google, but in Meta's case, over the last decade, we have open sourced over 1,000 AI databases and models. It's not always appropriate. Sometimes there are reasons not to do it. But where possible, the more that this technology can be shared, because otherwise the risk is it really is technology which is only developed by a very small number of highly resourced institutions, public and private institutions around the world, with deep enough pockets, with enough GPU capacity, and with enough large-scale data to get their hands on. And that's why we, for instance, have open-sourced our large language model, Llama 2, and we have around 30 million uses of it already from researchers, innovators, and developers around the world, including here in China. So that's the first point. The second point is, it is human nature to worry about the worst. But I think it's also worth remembering that AI is also it's a sword, not just a shield. If I look, for instance, at the work of Meta in social media and the constant adversarial work we have to do to try and minimize bad content, hate speech, for instance. The prevalence of hate speech, and this is publicly available audited data, on Facebook now stands at somewhere between 0.01% and 0.02%. So that means if you're constantly scrolling on Facebook for far too long than you should, you would find maybe 1 or 2 bits of hate speech out of every 10,000 bits of content that you might find. I wish it would be 0, but it's never going to be 0 because, remember, it's legal speech. But here's the point. That is down by it's down by about 60% just over the last 18 to 24 months for one reason alone, which is AI. So AI, yes, of course, that it poses new challenges. It's also a fantastic tool for us to do, as the Prime Minister himself said, to minimize the bad and amplify the good. And then the final thing I would say is this. As we grapple with risks, yes, there's been lots of talk about long-term potential existential risks. The prospect of so-called, autonomous AI or general AI, which will sort of develop an autonomy and agency of its own. But there are things we need to do now, which is mentioned earlier. We need to have some kind of agreement across the industry and with governments and with stakeholders on how we identify the provenance and we can detect AI-generated content. Not text content, that's not possible, but certainly visual content. The more you can have uniform standards developed quickly, the safer that all those elections that people have talked about, which are taking place next year, will take place. So I think it's important to focus on the here and now, not just on the theoretical tomorrow.
Very much, Mr. Clegg. I believe that everyone has lots of questions, but there's a lots of questions I have today. So now I move on to the second question. So in this previous question, we heard that AI companies are developing highly advanced AI systems and various applications. At the same time, they are making efforts to respond to risks and challenges brought by generative AI. So the guiding principles and code of conduct for organizations developing advanced AI systems set out how organizations should take measures and actions against risks and challenges. prior to the model release and market placement, and should continue to work on addressing vulnerabilities and mitigating risks after the release. What risks and challenges do you think are most important for those organizations to address in their efforts? What technical measures and actions do you think to be most effective? I would like to invite Mr. Nizal to answer this question and give your insight. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Excellencies, distinguished speakers, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. First of all, allow me to thank the organizer of the session for the opportunity to be in the same stage with honorable presenters today to share about artificial intelligence, a hot topic recently. The development of AI has greatly improved efficiency across commercial sectors. In 2021, AI added 26.7 million workers in Indonesia, or equivalent to 22% of the workforce. Yet, we must acknowledge that AI also comes with various risks, such as privacy, intellectual property violations, the potential of biases, as well as hallucinations that requires our attention. Against such backdrop, Indonesia believes we must intensify our approaches on mitigating the risk of AI both at policy and practical levels. One of the milestone evidence such commitment was made 4 years ago in Japan, when we supported the G20 AI principle during Japan G20 presidency to set a common understanding on the principles of AI. With the recently issued the G7 Hiroshima process as previously presented by Minister Suzuki, the effort to involve different stakeholders, even beyond G7 members, are applaudable. The urgently growing need to establish governance to mitigate various risks that AI, specifically on the generative AI, has demanded us, the global community, to act promptly but not recklessly. Indonesia is also not waiting in silence. We have begun the development of our AI governance ecosystem from 2020 through several policies, namely National Strategy of Artificial Intelligence, outlining roadmap on the development of AI governance ecosystem in Indonesia. Secondly, standard classification of business line for business developing AI-based programming, and provision for automated personal data protection under law on personal data protections. Though not specifically addressing AI-based personal data processing, it provides foundation for more complex personal data processing activities. Last but not least, we are also in the process of developing a circular letter on artificial intelligence ethics that is hoped to embody principles from prominent global references, infused with our local wisdom to respond to the demand of AI governance. Ladies and gentlemen, we understand that the government cannot act alone. As such, in the process of improving our governance, we invite the involvement from various stakeholders to contribute on the development of our policies as well as ecosystem. Specifically, we are in the pursuit of exploring use cases, potential risks, as well as approaches and technologies to mitigate risks of AI utilizations. We also cognizant that AI governance itself is not sufficient to mitigate the risks and threat of AI. We still need additional provisions to ensure positive impact of AI for everyone. This includes the implementation of supportive policies encompassing areas such as the content moderation, ensuring fairness and non-discrimination in the market, as well as digital literacy effort. Against such backdrop, Indonesia is ready to further the discussion of AI global governance. especially to play the role as bridge builder between various countries with different maturity level of AI to ensure our AI utilization might advance the well-being of our society now in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nazal. So I would like to ask the same question to Mr. Matza.
Well, thank you very much. First of all, I think one main things we must to realize as a challenge is how we can bring more voices from developing countries into this debate. And that's very hard because sometimes given the sheer complexity of the issues at hand, is not something that's very simply done. So while thanking very much the Japanese government for the kind invitation to be here today, I want to commend it for the open way and inclusive way it's making, the efforts making to make this process as open and inclusive as possible. I think that's very important. I think we must be realistic about the huge asymmetries in the AI landscape and how they affect the way different countries and actors approach this issue when it comes to discussing risks and mitigation measures. Large language models have been developed by few companies based in very few countries. Of course, being mostly G7 countries, the Hiroshima process may be of particular relevance considering this status quo. In any event, we're talking about a very concentrated market that may change in the future. Hopefully it will, but that's the reality today. So from our perspective, I think organizations, that was touched upon before from other colleagues, organizations, particularly in the developing world, should be mindful of the need to bring a sense of local ownership to the countries and communities where they operate. In the sense, one of the main issues will be, I think, the adaptation of those models to local realities. And crucially here, I think there is an issue of how to adjust the training of the models with data that is more reflective of local circumstances. I think it's a main topic that must be addressed. Also essential, in our views, to incentivize and strengthen local innovation ecosystems in order to allow for the development of a growing number of applications by domestic companies. Countries should strive to have dynamic AI ecosystems, even if they're not able to have their own, let's say, open AI style companies, but we know that would be unrealistic to expect. So we believe that this effort to incentivizing local ecosystems would be a possible way forward with a view to democratizing this market that, as I said, is very concentrated today. Another topic I wanted to raise is when it comes to risks and mitigation of risks, we think it's important to widen a little bit the scope of what we understand by risks. We should not lose sight of the big risks that AI has of exponentially amplifying economic, social, and digital divides between developed and developing countries. This should be counted as a risk. So we have seen from some time now that there's a concept of safety by design that is well accepted by many actors in this field. They are working on it. We should also work on the notion that new technologies, including AI models, should be inclusive by design, in a way that social and digital inclusion should not be an afterthought, but should be at the forefront of our considerations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Matza. Now, I would like to move on to the question 3. So we heard that the draft guiding principles and draft code of conduct include principles and actions for AI developers to responsibly share information on security and safety risks posed by the models, the measures taken to address these risks, and to publish transparency reports and to establish and disclose privacy policies and AI governance policies. What information do you think those organizations should be encouraged to share? And with who? What elements do you think should be included in transparency reports? How can information sharing be best done along the value chain, especially with downstream developers who further develop and fine-tune models? So I would like to invite Chair Vint-Cerf to give your answer to this. So you have 3 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. First of all, I want to say I'm very, very grateful to the Prime Minister for his opening observations about AI and the Internet Governance Forum. I found them most hopeful and very encouraging. I also would like to point out to you some parallels. First of all, the Internet is simply a very large software artifact. So is artificial intelligence and machine learning. As a young programmer, I became fascinated by the idea that you could use software to create your own little universe, and it would do what you told it to do. Then I discovered that it does what you told it to do, but not necessarily what you wanted it to do. And the difference between those two is called a bug. And I discovered how easy it was to create bugs and how hard it was to find them and fix them in the software. So why is that relevant? I think all the things that you are hearing about artificial intelligence and machine learning apply generally to software. And so we should be thinking about not just the rules for AI and ML development, but also generally software. We have become intensely dependent on software. It is by far the most powerful and adaptable technology ever created, and I would argue that the machine learning world has taken a step beyond that. But with dependency comes risk, and you've heard that theme repeatedly. The result is that the risks are a function of the application to which the machine learning and AI models are put. And this leads to the question about single points of failure and the side effects of becoming increasingly dependent on these pieces of software. That leads to a very important point about responsibility and the responsible development and use of software. It leads to questions of ethics in research and academia. What kind of research do you perform and under what conditions? How does business apply and use these artificial intelligence and machine learning tools and software in general? And finally, how are these systems governed? And we've been hearing some major and important initiatives. Now, to come to your specific question about information sharing, there are several obvious things that we would want to share. The first one is the source of the training material. Where did this content come from? When these machine learning systems are actually used, it's important to have some idea of how the source material was actually applied, and so we can have some sense of judgment about the quality of the resulting system. We also need to be able to understand under what conditions these systems will misbehave. It's become more and more difficult to predict because the systems are so complex and their function is less like the if-then-else kinds of software that I grew up with, and more like a highly probabilistic system that has a probability of being correct and a probability of being not correct. So if we're going to share information, we should be able to share our experiences. We should be able to alert the consumers and users of these applications as to the potential hazards that they might encounter. I would like to applaud the European Union's effort to grade the risk factors of applications. So there are some high-risk applications like healthcare, health advice, medical diagnosis, which should get considerably more scrutiny, the software that's used to provide those services, whereas if it's just entertainment, perhaps the risk factor is lower. I suspect I would run way over my time, as I can see our moderator wielding her microphone. So I'll stop there and thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vinsoff. I wish I had more time. However, now I would like to invite Ms. Won to respond to the same question.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the Japanese government, our host country. Singapore has always cared a lot about AI governance. We had an AI model governance framework in 2018, which we updated in 2022, and are now working on the next update. In June of this year, we launched the AI Verify Open Source Foundation to have a conversation and a global platform for discussion on AI governance issues. And we also wrote a discussion paper highlighting some of the risks and issues, as well as practical solutions to deal with generative AI, its risks and potential pathways forward. Specifically on this question, we do think that there is space for policymakers and industries to co-create a shared responsibility framework as a first step in order to clarify the responsibilities of all parties in the model development lifecycle, as well as the safeguards and measures that they need to respectively undertake. Now, there is some useful information that can be shared, especially by model developers. For example, information about how their models are developed and tested, as well as transparency on the type of training data sets used. Specifically to the end user, information can be provided, for example, limitations on the performance of models, as well as information on how and whether data input by a user into the model will be used by developers to further enhance the model. We do think such a shared responsibility framework, which is common in the world of software development, will allow us to parse out the different responsibilities and admittedly having a layer of complexity because of the foundational nature of these models. But we do think that for clarity, establishing standardized information to be shared about the model will allow deployers and end users to make proper risk assessments. We do agree that labeling and watermarking of AI-generated content will allow consumers of content to make more informed decisions and choices, and there is certainly great, much to commend a globally and internationally aligned efforts with many stakeholders involved in this process. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wan. And I would like to move on to the next question. So the guiding principles and code of conduct include principles and actions for AI developers to invest it and develop security measures as well as technical measures for content authentication, such as watermarking and content provenance mechanism and data input control measures. What types of measures do you think would be most effective for organizations to invest in or develop? So now I would like to invite President Walker again to respond to this question. So President Walker, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. The large language models that we're seeing today come out of a problem in search. Originally in search, you're trying to take a word and search the internet for matching words, and then you realize you need to search for synonyms, and then for related concepts. How does the King of England relate to the Queen of Spain? Research that was being done about a dozen years ago mapped every word in English and then ultimately in many languages around the world in mathematical terms, in vectors. And then about 5 or 6 years ago, further research that was published helped identify something called transformers, an architecture which allowed us to understand all the richness in human language, and soon to be 1,000 languages around the world. Now, we've learned many things in working with content on the internet that will carry over to these new challenges of security and content authenticity. So for example, when it comes to security, we believe that we need to work collectively. We have proposed something called a Safe AI framework, SAFE for short, that establishes an ecosystem approach to making sure that model weights and other core information are kept secure when necessary, but to Nick's point, made open and available when possible. When it comes to authentication of these tools, there are a number of efforts we are progressing. We have an effort called SynthID that identifies video and images that are available at the pixel level. So even if they're transformed or turned upside down or changed in different colors, you can still authenticate where they came from. A second effort has to do with about this image in search, allowing you to understand the provenance of when an image was first uploaded to the internet. And finally, we have adopted a new policy that requires the disclosure of the use of generative AI for election ads in ways that are misleading or that could change the results of elections. These efforts, and many more like them across the industry, will be an important part of answering this question of how do we make sure we can trust the products of AI. But at the same time, I must say that something can be authenticated and still false. And so we collectively, and all of the people around the world, we need to educate ourselves. We need to become digitally literate, AI literate about these new tools so that we understand the underlying meaning and what we can and what we can't trust.
Very much. So now I would like to ask Professor Murai to respond to the same question.
Okay. Yeah, I remember when I visited one of the U.S. university and who did the philosophical researches using a computer. That was like early 70s. And so typing into all the books, philosophy books, and analyzing it, and then the understanding what the human being is, thinking about type of a thing. So that was very much, kind of starting up about AI with the language information based on that. But that language was very much trustable books in the philosophy books and other things. What's different today for the working on generative AI and other things? So it's generated from all the people's social networking context and IoT sensor data as well, and many of the information on the web and generated from everywhere. And then that is basically the very much security measures of the AI today. And then so sources and the accuracy of the data and how trustable all those information would be. So in Japan, we started one of the industrial efforts called originator profile, which is the information on the web to be who's originated and then authorized because of that reason, particular reason. In order to achieve that, then the ID and the sources of information and the traceable from the exact data is also important. And then not only the text messages for the AI now is an accurate number generated from sensors around, which is very much kind of learning sources for the global warming and other environmental studies. And so that kind of accuracy is going to be monitored and discussed, and also with shared as a wisdom among the AI players.
Much, Professor Murai. So I would like to move on to the next question. So the draft guiding principles and draft code of conduct includes requirement for AI developers to promote development of advanced AI systems to address world's greatest challenges such as climate crisis, global health, and education. What fields do you think those organizations should prioritize in their activities and investment other than those described in the previous questions? What are some proactive measures, including giving kinds of incentives to companies, we could embed in a code of conduct that would enable innovation as opposed to only mitigating risks? So I would like to invite Ms. Doreen Bodgan-Martin to respond to this question. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. And good morning. It's great to be here. Let me start by thanking the government of Japan for putting this topic so high on the agenda here at the IGF. I think to answer your question, the private sector really is the driving force behind AI innovation, and I would say I'm happy to see how much they're stepping up to address some of the world's greatest problems. And I guess Nick, I think you mentioned this minimizing the bad and, of course, trying to amplify the good. I guess, Vint, that would be get rid of the bugs so that we can amplify that good. The private sector is also a key constituent in the ITU membership, and happy that 2 of the ITU members, Meta and Google, are part of the ITU family, because I think that kind of engagement also helps us understand what they're looking for when it comes to providing insights, when it comes to our engagements with policymakers and regulators. We have found that sort of a combination of incentives are important, ranging from perhaps economic incentives to explicit recognition of contributions at national and international levels to help really effectively motivate the private sector to invest in initiatives that ultimately benefit society. Of course, that includes innovative public-private partnerships. I think that's key. You mentioned healthcare, education, climate, definitely. I think I would give perhaps an example, something that stands out for me. We've been very focused on school connectivity. Of course, that's linked also to the WSIS process that had a target to connect every school by 2015. We didn't get there. But we do have an initiative together with UNICEF and many private sector partners, and we're using AI to actually find schools. So we're using AI techniques for mapping. We're also using AI techniques to look at different connectivity configurations so that we can ultimately bring down cost. And perhaps just to share another example, I would say disaster management, that's a key priority also for the government of Japan. I think AI has shown lots of potential in that space. We're part of the Early Warning for All initiative, working closely with Japan, WMO, and UNEP. We're looking at ways that you can use AI when it comes to data collection and handling, when it comes to natural hazard modeling, and of course when it comes to effective emergency communications. So I think really there's probably nothing that we cannot do if we actually manage to leverage multi-stakeholder partnerships to drive positive change. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bogdan-Martin. So I would like to ask the same question to Mr. Nazal.
Yes. Yeah, we concerned about misinformation and disinformation actually. So because next year we will have elections. And we try to issue some regulations on the spread of information through the digital platform that using AI. And we collaborate with multi-stakeholders also. And we work closely with the global digital platform like Google and Meta as well. And hopefully we can handle it because this is really a big test, how AI will use in the next election for the political campaigns. And hopefully we have fair and safe elections next year. Thank you.
Very much. So what about Professor Murai?
Yeah, Doreen, thank you very much for raising the disaster things and the natural disaster earthquake. That is really the very important issue of this country. And we are facing always the big earthquake and then also recovery from that. But every time we encounter the earthquake, then it's a lot of digital data. Network and also support and is saving people's life, which is a very, very serious one. And now AI and the more precise and the trustable data would be a benefit for the kind of a next one, so that Japan need to be preparing for that. And another big issue of Japan is a very serious elderly society issue, which is when the people get older, then there is a lot of healthcare issues, and then so healthcare issues, including the hospital and medical data manipulations, which has never been processed in a proper way for the past, I should say, 30 years, right? And not only Japan, though. Everywhere in the world, by the way. Anyway, so then we started to work on those areas, and then it's a very interesting that the very critical area, like data privacy and the data accuracy and the manipulation and the amount of the data to manipulate, and amount of the resources of the hardware to do that. It's going to be a very serious one, and therefore I think it's a very important area, healthcare and those disaster management area, because it's a very much a multiple responsibility exists in there, everywhere, and then they need to work together, and so the self-assessment is going to be important. Third-party checking is going to be important, and also government involvement, of course, is going to be very important. Therefore, exactly the very, very important example of a multi-stakeholder model achieving and approaching the AI and the other future.
Professor Murai. So I would like to move on to the next question. So how do you foresee AI developing over the next few years, and what do you think organizations developing advanced AI systems do in order to realize trustworthy AI across society? So first, I would like to ask this question to President Clegg.
Well, I think the problem about the future is it's always very difficult to predict, particularly with technology which is evolving as fast as it is. But I think some things are relatively predictable as far as the development of these large language models are concerned. So one thing I think you'll see fairly soon is a lot of these large language models, as the name implies, were large language models. So they were focused on language, and then you had separate models based on visual content. And I think those things will merge so that you'll have models which are what they call multimodal. They operate both in terms of text and visual content, and that will introduce significant additional versatility to those models. I think the issue of how the languages that are used in the training data is a very important one. A lot of these large language models, particularly the ones obviously emanating from the big US tech companies, were originally trained in English. I mean, that doesn't mean, by the way, that developers can't use the models and redeploy them in their own language. So, for instance, here in Japan, ELIZA, a company, has taken Llama 2, its open sourced form, and has actually developed a very high-performing large language model in Japanese here in Japan. But I think you will see those models in future being trained, if I can put it at a very sort of foundational level, in multiple languages at the same time. I think one of the big open questions, I'd be very fascinated what particularly some of the leading, it's very difficult to talk about these things, by the way, when you have two godfathers of the internet on the stage. I mean, I defer to them completely, so I'm interested to know what they think. But I think there has been this assumption that these models just get bigger. I'm not actually necessarily clear if that's necessarily going to turn out like that. I mean, firstly, there's going to be just an incentive to be efficient, to be more efficient with data, use less data, use less computing power, use less money. So I think there's going to be a draw, and also, the applications of these models, particularly in their fine-tuned form, will be most impactful not necessarily because they're bigger, just if they're just fine-tuned to deliver particular objectives. So I think this assumption, which has certainly been there in the public debate, that they just get exponentially bigger all the time, I'm not necessarily sure if that's going to be the case. Anyway, these large language models, I mean, there's only so many times that you can reconsume and redigest all the content, the public content on the internet. You can only do that a few times. After a while, you run out. So I think size is going to be, I don't think size is the only determinant of capability here, and nor do I think risk is only associated with size either.
Much. So I would like to ask the same question to the father of internet, Dr. Sir.
I'm sure that everyone will recognize that just because I've had a lot to do with the internet doesn't necessarily mean I know anything about artificial intelligence, so you should be careful about my answers. I will tell you something I've learned from a colleague at UCLA. His name is Judah Pearl. He is one of the winners of the Turing Award, which is the top award in computer science, for his work in machine learning and AI. He's written 2 books. One is called Causality, and the other one is, if I remember that right, Causality, and the other one was called The Book of Why, as in W-H-Y. What was his point? His point was that large machine learning models are all about probability. They talk about probabilistic performance. They don't necessarily deal with causality, and so you can't conclude anything from them unless you have a causal model to go along with the correlation that these large machine learning models incorporate. And I'm using machine learning here rather than large language model or artificial intelligence very deliberately. If you don't appreciate causality versus correlation, you'll appreciate the story that some parties would conclude, looking at the statistics, that flat tires cause babies. And the reason for this is that there's a high correlation between the number of flat tires occurring near a hospital and the number of babies that are born. And you can quickly appreciate that the real reason that there are flat tires is because someone is racing to get the mother to the hospital so the baby can be born there and not in the car. And the result of the fast driving sometimes is flat tires. To give you one other example where causality was really important, at Google, you can imagine we consume a lot of power cooling the data center off because running all those computers generates a lot of heat. Once a week, we used to have an engineer who tried to adjust the valves in order to figure out how to minimize the amount of power required to cool the data center. We trained a machine learning system to perform that task. It saved 40% of the power requirement that we had been able to achieve manually. So causality is going to be our friend here, and we need to incorporate that into the way in which we train and use these models.
Joseph, so I would like to move on to the next question. So do you think there should be consideration given to developing tools or mechanisms to help organizations monitor the implementation of the guiding principles and the code of conduct, and to hold organizations accountable for their progress in doing so? So I would like to invite Professor Murai to answer this question.
Oh, sorry, I missed the order.
It's the question number 7. So how do we consider about the monitoring the implementation of the guiding principles and the code of conduct?
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's a kind of a repeat, but monitoring and is a self-assessment is a really important one, and by any entity who's processing the thing in the code. And it's my own responsibility to do this, and including the individuals who's being involved in this is going to be very important, and also apart from yourself and the third party or the independent entity, it's going to be kind of a monitoring and then sharing the wisdom for the processing is going to be really important. Public need to address on what they should do, but also the investing on the researches and the educations is going to be very much a government role and the public sector's role, and increasing the quality of the monitoring for the AI processes.
Thank you, Professor Murai. So I also would like to invite Dr. Surf again to respond to the same question.
Well, of course, the key question here is what do we measure and what objective function are we trying to achieve? It takes a great deal of creativity to figure out how to assess the quality of large language models and machine learning models. The concrete objective functions, like the one I mentioned earlier, which is to reduce the cost of cooling off our data centers, are pretty obvious kind of measurement. But it's a much more complex question to answer. How well did the large language model respond to your prompt and produce its output? Was it usable or not? I don't have a deep notion right now of how to apply an objective function to those kinds of applications. The one thing I will say is that if we can detect the quality of responses coming back in high-risk environments, that might be a top priority for us to make sure that if there are high-risk applications being used, that we measure safety as the most important metric of success.
Thank you, Dr. Surf. I would like to ask this next question to Mr. Bogdan. So as the head of the UN agency working hard to bridge the digital divide, what needs to be done to ensure that the global south is not left behind on AI developments while doing so responsibly? What are some of your recommendations to the Hiroshima AI process in this regard?
Thank you. I think, Luciano, you in part kind of answered this before, so I'm going to pick up from where you kind of left off. I think you can't be part of the AI revolution if you're not part of the digital revolution. So this is a reminder about the 2.6 billion people that are still offline today, the 2.6 billion people that are actually digitally excluded today. So that I would say a clear message, maybe let's not lose sight of some of the fundamentals around meaningful universal connectivity, the building blocks of that universal meaningful connectivity, from the infrastructure to the digital skills. I think, Kent, you mentioned that before, the affordability, the cybersecurity, and of course, much, much more. In terms of specific recommendations, perhaps I would share maybe three. I would say the first is that role of meaningful universal connectivity. I think to embrace that in the context of the guiding principles and the code of conduct, including perhaps targeted commitments from companies in different areas like capacity development. The skills piece would be great. Also focused on the gender gap. We got that big gender gap, so I would just perhaps suggest that. The ITU is very focused on that capacity development piece in the space of AI. We're working to incorporate it in our capacity development offerings together with other UN partners from UNDP, UNESCO, and others. I guess my second recommendation would be in the space of the technical standards, and His Excellency the Minister, I think you laid that out. I think it was point 10. So just to ensure that technical standards are actually a sort of prerequisite when we look at effective implementation of the guidelines. And again, on ITU's side, we'll do our part, working with other UN agencies in technical standards areas. And I guess the last piece, and this is kind of a plea picking up on the UN SG's comments in the opening, linked to the governance gap, perhaps. And I would say, use the UN as a catalyst for progress in this context. I think that's really important. This morning, the Vice Minister from Japan kind of pleaded with us to ensure collaboration amongst these different discussions, so I think that's really important. Many things are happening, many countries are taking different approaches, and I think it's important that we share experiences and work together. The ITU has the AI for Good Global Summit. We work with some 40 different UN agencies, many of the partners up here on stage. I think that's also a good space to exchange experiences, best practices, and of course the upcoming AI advisory body that we heard also mentioned by the SG. I think the UN tech envoy was in the crowd. But I think that's also another important element because that group will lay out recommendations that we can take forward in the context of the Global Digital Compact and the Summit of the Future. So 3 pillars: universal connectivity, technical standards, and of course see the UN as a process that can be leveraged. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Balgan-Martin. So I would like to ask the next question to Vice Minister, Mr. Nezal. So how can we engage a wide range of stakeholders on the guiding principles and the code of conduct?
Yes, this is still a big question for us in Indonesia as well, because as you know, that artificial intelligence become a hot discussions among countries, and at the global levels, we still seek to the best practices that can inspire us to regulate AI in our country. But we believe UNESCO also working on it, and we share some insights as well with UNESCO and try to set the fundamental norms on guidelines to implementation of artificial intelligence. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, I would like to ask the same question to Mr. Matza.
Thank you. As I mentioned before, I think it's important to make sure the discussion is as inclusive as possible, and that allows for a very diverse range of voices and constituents to be heard. So full engagement with other organizations, different stakeholders, I think is essential to ensure the long-term sustainability of this effort. We believe that's important in particular to ensure that this process is carried out in dialogue and is consistent with efforts that are being developed in other organizations, in other fora. As I said, to ensure this exercise is effective in the long term. So we believe it's important that in due course, those discussions are expanded to multilateral spaces somehow. We can make it more representative and also sustainable. We have a concern about fragmentation. We think fragmentation, there's a parallel institutional fragmentation with fragmentation of the digital world. I think these two things go somehow hand in hand. So we think it's important to look for consistent and cohesion in the discussion, both in terms of the overall narrative about challenges, risks, and opportunities, but also in terms of policies and regulatory approaches. We believe also that multilateral engagement will also be necessary to reduce a little bit those asymmetries I mentioned before in terms of capabilities and information between developed and developing countries. And so to help countries acquire the expertise and capabilities they need to navigate this landscape with a minimum sense of autonomy and ownership of the process, so as they can fully enjoy the benefits AI can bring to everyone. And I think Secretary General Doreen mentioned already discussions in the UN, and I think that's a way forward. We encourage countries to double their bet on multilateralism and give it a chance. We see that we will have important debates in the UN in the context of the Global Digital Compact and looking forward in terms of how we engage in the renewal of the mandate of the WISES. So I think we have a chance to place again our energy and effort in the multilateral system, and I think that's a great opportunity to give sense of ownership to everybody in that debate. So that would be my comment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Matza. So I would like to ask the same question to Ms. Wang.
I think we very much agree with the comments of my colleagues so far. A consultative process is absolutely important, both for developing the principles and the code of conduct, as well as technical standards that will eventually hold companies, organizations accountable. It would be useful to hear from other thought leaders and countries outside of the G7 key groupings. For example, we have the Association of Southeast Asian Nations that a number of us are part of. There's also the Forum of Small States that are able to bring together some of the voices in the Global South into this conversation. And this will allow the principles and the codes of conduct and the standards to be richer and more textured and able to account for the rich cultural diversity that we have in the globe. I think the other experience we would share from Singapore's perspective is working very closely with industry players, such as those on the stage, as well as others and other international and multilateral stakeholder bodies on concrete projects to sort of test out this technology, understand firsthand, getting your hands dirty on what responsible AI really means in context-specific applications, domain-specific applications. Drilling down into the details is very important. In this multi-stakeholder process, we're very supportive of the effort. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wan. So this is the last question. So in addition to our work on the guiding principles and code of conduct for organizations developing advanced AI systems, the Hiroshima AI process will seek to elaborate guiding principles for all AI actors and promote project-based cooperation with international organizations. Do you have any views you wish to share on potential outcomes for these future streams of work? What is the most urgent deliverable? I would like to ask this question to President Walker.
Thank you. I think today's discussion has illustrated the incredible importance of highlighting both the responsibility side and the opportunity side of this tool. As Vince says, we probably shouldn't call it AI. It's computational statistics. But what an amazing tool it is proving to be. It is giving us ways to help predict the future in different ways. We can now forecast the weather a week away, as well as we used to be able to predict it a day away. For issues like earthquakes, today I understand Japan experienced a tragic earthquake. Afghanistan, just in the last couple of days, thousands of people were killed in Afghanistan. If we could provide just a little bit more warning for issues like that, we are already predicting forest fires and where they might spread. We have tools that will predict flooding that are now covering 80 different countries around the world. So governments working together to understand how they can implement those tools and make them available to their citizens is an important agenda. There are hard trade-offs, of course, between openness and security, transparency, how do we have more explainability for these tools, how to define what tools should be regulated, how different models should be classified. But governments are at the forefront of trying to figure out how to get this right. And then there are additional steps that we need to take to understand how to invest in research, to make both the research tools and the computation broadly available around the world. And how do we imagine the future of work? In many countries like Japan, we need desperately to have more productivity for citizens, but that also means that jobs will change. How do we help our workers throughout the world imagine a new AI-enabled future where they are more productive and live better, healthier, wealthier lives? So collectively, through efforts like the G7 and the OECD work and the ITU work on AI for good, we're confident that we can actually achieve that potential. And we encourage the international community to take an optimistic and forward-looking view in doing just that. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, I would like to invite President Clegg for the same question.
The most impactful deliverable. Well, I think I think in the broadest sense of the word, transparency. I think one of the things that is happening and why the debate has swithered around so much in recent months is a sort of mystique and mystery has built up around this technology. It is very powerful. It will be very transformative in many respects. But in other respects, what did you call it? What did you call it, Ken? Computational statistics, one way to put it. I mean, in many ways, they're like much my cruder version of that. It's like a sort of giant autocomplete system. Particularly the large language models, because they're literally just guessing what the next word, or rather the next token, should be in the response to a human prompt by processing huge amounts of data across, vast amounts of parameters. But I think sometimes in the debate we've sort of anthropomorphized the technology and sort of almost confer in it a certain kind of power, and intelligence, which it, oddly enough, actually doesn't possess. These systems don't know anything inherently. They're just extremely good at guessing and predicting and along the probabilistic logic that was described earlier. So we need to make it as transparent as possible. Transparent in terms of how big companies like Meta and Google develop these models in the first place. How is the data being used? How do the model weights operate? What are the red teaming we do to make sure it's safe? How do we make it accessible to researchers? But also transparent to users. So this is why I stressed earlier, and it's in the draft Hiroshima Code of Conduct, this work on provenance, detectability, and watermarking. You can't trust something if you can't detect it in the first place. And there's a lot of very, very difficult technical detail involved in that, because quite a lot of, in the future, content will be a hybrid between AI and human creativity. So how do you identify that? How do you make sure that once you have detected something that has been generated by AI, how does that travel from one platform to the other? The internet is not, just balkanized in different silos. Content flows across the internet around the world. So I think transparency, to give people greater comfort that this technology is there to serve them, that they are not there to serve the technology.
Thank you, Mr. Clegg. So that was our last question, and as a role of the moderator, I need to summarize this discussion. However, I think I need additional 1 hour to summarize overall this discussion. So I just make one or two comments regarding this panel discussion. So once again, I really enjoyed this panel discussion, and since we have actually discussed about this guiding principles and code of conduct, but what I heard is like beyond this kind of guiding principles. So there's a lot of initiatives ongoing, and each companies or each international organizations and each nations are actually having their own legal frameworks and their own culture, and they have developing the measures towards this newly developed technology, the generative AI, and also not only the technology, but also the AI system, the services, including not only machines, but also the interaction with the human beings. And that's really important, and that actually makes it very confusing. But that's also is the very important things. So today, as Clegg lastly mentioned, the transparency is really important. And also the other keywords we actually repeatedly heard is the collaboration. And I guess we have this IGF forums has lasted a couple of days, so we can continue to discuss how important this topic is and how we can be responsible as the developers or the deployers or maybe actual users to kind of face this new technology and to make the society more better. And so today, the panel discussion would be very effective guidance to the AI Hiroshima process, but also to all of us who are actually interested in this topic. So I will stop here unless I will kind of continuously speak out. So lastly, I would like to invite Mr. Suzuki, Minister of Internal Affairs and Communications, for the closing remarks.
So thank you very much for your valuable discussions today. As was mentioned by Prime Minister Kishida in his keynote address, generative AI provides services transcending national boundaries and touches the lives of people across the world. It is most beneficial that we were able to engage in discussions at IGF where the stakeholders the world over have gathered. Generative AI entails possibilities as well as risks and is also technology that will transform society in a major way. I'm convinced that today's discussions will deepen our awareness about the risks of generative AI and that it will become a step forward to share the possibilities of generative AI, transcending regions, standpoints, and positions. As for the valuable opinions offered by international organizations, governments, AI developers and corporations, researchers, and representatives of civil society, we will aim to reflect them in the Hiroshima AI process going forward. Moreover, under Global Partnership on AI, GPAI, we plan to establish an AI Expert Support Center anew to tackle the challenges of AI and broaden the possibilities through project-based initiatives. With regard to these projects-based initiatives to resolve social issues, we have received hopes and expectations from the governments of the Global South yesterday, day zero, in a session hosted by the Ministry of Internal Affairs and Communications. Today's discussions were most meaningful, and as we continue our discussions on AI governance, it will be important to listen to the views of various concerned persons, and we will make sure to take such initiatives. Thank you very much for your presentations and for your attendance.
Thank you very much. This concludes the opening session, Global AI Governance and Generative AI. So please give the last round of applause for all the panelists. Thank you very much. So the panel is closed, and I'll give back my microphone to the master of the conference.
Thank you very much. So ladies and gentlemen, we have now come to the end of the high-level panel 5, Artificial Intelligence. I would like to extend our appreciation for your presence here today. Thank you very much for all the speakers and the panelists. Thank you so much. So ladies and gentlemen, before you depart, kindly ensure you have all your belongings with you, and please also be sure to hand over the simultaneous receiver to the staff at the exit doors when you leave the door. So the lunchbox with soup will be served at the Sakura Swan event hall and annex hall, and you'll be able to have it in each conference room. Once again, thank you very much for your attendance.
三さん、ちょっとステージ上残ってますが、転換始めますね。